Do you know who I am? I'm kind of a big deal.
Welcome to another edition of Overtime with Dr. Michael Jacobs. I'm Chip Franklin, where we discuss, it's always about injuries to some extent because, and you know this better than anyone else, these guys, when they went into spring training, it's probably the only time for the next 7 months when they're not in pain in some degree. Isn't that accurate?
Well, the season takes its toll. It's not football,
Right.
but by the end of the season, the everyday players, and certainly some of the backup players who take outrageous amounts of batting practice to try to become regulars, are pretty worn down, just on an overuse basis. That's for sure.
You know, it's funny too, because I think I was thinking about this. I looked it up that there's a lot of ways to get injured. Obviously, you know, sometimes it's something just literally, you know, you swing the bat 5,000 times over a season. You know, you're going to get oblique, you're going to get, you know, shoulder injuries, you're going to get back, you're going to whatever. And then I was reading that it wasn't until 1971 that they required you to wear a cap, a helmet while batting. And I wonder, do you remember that? And did they grandfather people in like they did in the NHL and some other places where they said you didn't wear a cap before, you don't have to now? Or did they make everybody wear that cap?
I think you're not, I think you're a little bit off there. I remember that age, and I remember Mickey Mantle, who had that famous way of taking his hat off, who I watched all the time. He used to wear a liner. And
Right.
a liner was like I guess like a skull cap underneath his hat. So I think you had to wear a liner for a bit before you had to wear a traditional batting helmet. And of course, more recently, they've added an ear flap, which a lot of players protested about, just like you said in hockey. But I vividly remember Mickey Mantle looking like he had a baseball hat on, but he had a liner underneath it. So
Well,
that may have been a little sooner.
Fernando Tatis the other day got hit in the head with a 95-mile-an-hour fastball. Now, it popped off the very top of his head. But, you know, we know that even if it doesn't hit you in the flesh and it hits that helmet, it can shake your brain around a bit, right?
Well, brain injuries and concussions actually do occur from your brain inside your cranium or your skull reverberating back and forth after the blow. So that is what the big problem is in football. And so it's not necessarily the initial blow, but it's the reverberation that gets you. And that's why the helmets are really designed to deflect the ball. But if you hit them flush on, that can really do some damage for certain.
Yeah.
No question about it.
Well, we remember Tony Conigliaro, the Red Sox phenom, as a kid, got hit in the face and his eye, and he was never the same. He never came back, really.
He was never successful when he came back, and he died prematurely. And he did say that with a fear factor that never fully went away. His brother Billy Conigliaro played too, as you know. But there is no question that, as I recollect, that did more hit him in the face. Where whether he was wearing a helmet or not, it probably wouldn't have made much of a difference because he did have vision issues. But there's no question it's dangerous. It's like getting hit with the hockey puck. Very rarely does somebody get hit and expire from it, but it can occasionally happen.
I was going to get a beer at a Capitals game, and I got hit in the back with a puck. You know, we were down in the lower section, and I'm walking up the stairs, and boom. And I was like, I thought somebody came up behind me and smashed me in the back. And I turned around ready to who was that? And there's 1,000 people, of course, diving for the puck. So, yeah, that's interesting, too, because one of the last 3 years putting up that net, I kind of, at first, I didn't like the idea of that net along the side of the stadiums. But now I think with the power these guys have, it was a good idea. Maybe it should have happened a while earlier.
Well, there's two pieces to that. Number one, the net behind home plate at Camden Yards used to be a bit lower, and Harold Baines fouled the ball straight back, and I was sitting with my wife, and she was turned away, and the ball was coming right for her face until I knocked it down. I spoke to the owner, and that's when they actually raised that net.
No kidding.
But another 4 feet. Yeah, Peter was very sensitive about that. And actually, one or two of the docs at the doctors' meetings lobbied to put the nets up, and MLB balked at it because of the sight lines. And it may have been a bat that went into the stands, actually, and not necessarily a ball. But somebody did get injured, and that's when they did it. But it had been suggested earlier and knocked down due to sightline issues. And as you know, in hockey, It's only more recently they have the net up after a fan was killed when a hockey puck shot up into the stands, hit him somewhere, and that fan actually passed away. And
Wow.
that's when the NHL put up their net. But
It's
that
funny
ball's
too.
moving.
I've, when I worked at WBAL, we had tickets right behind home plate, like in the second row. It was great. I think it was the first row, and you acclimate immediately to that screen. I mean, you can see the game. It doesn't really matter. It was being. I mean, there's nothing like box seats. I think everybody should splurge, maybe skip a couple games just so they can get one game, sit down as close as they can, buy them from whomever you have to, because it's when you're down that close, and the ball players are coming in off the field, and you yell to them, and some are great, they'll nod to you like thank you, that kind of. It's just, is there a rule in the league where the players aren't supposed to talk to the fans during the game?
I am not aware of a rule, but I believe it was Cleveland, for one, actually had some dugout seats for patrons who could actually, they had a small number of seats that were at dugout level, which if you've ever sat there, which I have during spring training, the view is dreadful.
I was going to
But
say those seats look
if you want
horrible.
if you want to sit that low, you can, but you really can't see anything.
Yeah, Cleveland has those seats behind home plate, and they look horrible. It looks like, because you're looking, the field of action is right at your eyes. It's like you're looking up. I don't think that I would really like those seats at all.
When I first got the job, I got a kick at spring training and doing it, but I quickly realized you just can't see much. The only fun of sitting in the dugout is that the dugout gets a little segregated. The Latin guys tend to congregate in one area, and the veterans in another area, and the rookies in another area. And you hear everybody chatting away back there, and you always wonder, particularly when they're speaking Spanish and you don't understand Spanish, but they're probably saying, "What the heck's the doc doing here?" In my part of town. But I never really do that.
Do you remember athletes that when they were hurt, they just didn't want to see the doctor because they didn't want to get pulled from the lineup? So they would rather play hurt than go in and have something diagnosed. They were that tough. Does that ring a bell?
Well, there were many particularly veteran players or fringe players who are phobic about going into the training room. And in particular, if it's their walk year, they don't want any imaging done. They don't want any tests done. And of course, the club doesn't want it either, because they may be candidates to be traded at the trading deadline. So there's just kind of this mutual, and some players don't ask, don't tell. And if the player doesn't come in and say he has a problem, we don't know about it. So there's nothing we can do about it. Occasionally, a manager or a pitching coach will go up to a player and say, "You don't look like you're feeling well," but that conversation's not privy to me. And sometimes the answer is, "I'm fine, leave me alone." And sometimes it gets the player in, I assume.
So I made a list here on overtime for you to go down these names, and I'm going to call it the toughest list, but it doesn't have to be guys that just played through injuries. It can be tough because of their attitude, which is a big part of it too. Because if you have the right attitude, and it's you can get through. Attitude can actually work like ibuprofen in some ways, right? It can, you get geared up, your adrenaline gets going, it opens up those capillaries, and the pain kind of goes away because you really are that kind of competitor. And I made a long list. I'm not going to go through the whole list, but some of the people that didn't make my top 5 that didn't were Jeter, who I thought was a tough guy, played hard every second in between the lines. Would you agree?
He hardly missed a game. Obviously,
Right.
he wasn't junior, but he hardly missed a game, and he killed us.
Right.
We could have drafted him, and one of our best scouts said he was the best high school player you'd ever seen. But at the time, we were looking for immediate help. I think we took Mark Smith that year because we were looking for college-ready players, but we passed on Jeter.
Wow. Palmer, of course, we've talked about that before, you and I, just a tough guy, right?
Palmer's amazing to have pitched all those innings, but he knew how to pitch, and Palmer really understood his body. So I think he made all kinds of subtle adjustments on his own when things weren't quite right that allowed him to pitch. And back then, without these radar guns on every pitch, he probably moved his velocity around depending on how he felt. But he was a savant about knowing how to pitch.
These next 3, the first 2 I agree with. The third one I'm not sure. Bob Gibson, tough guy. Lenny Dykstra, tough guy. Was Curt Schilling that tough, or was that sock moment just taken out of proportion in a way? The red sock in the 04.
Well, I would say I've told you the story about Gibson and Buford, And I
Yeah.
remember watching another story where Gibson and Bill White were roommates forever. And the Cardinals actually desegregated St. Petersburg when in the mid 60s they had black and white players share the same room, which was unheard of in St.
Wow.
Petersburg in the 60s. They desegregated down at Al Lang Field. And Bill White, who's very sophisticated and articulate, and used to be the Yankees announcer before he became an executive, and Gibson were civil rights advocates and friends. And then Bill White got sent to Philadelphia, and in a key situation, Gibson hit him, and Bill White was yelling at him for first base, and Gibson just said, "You don't play with me anymore. Don't worry about it." So
Gibson, Doc, he didn't like to play in the All-Star game because he didn't want to get close to the guys. They would have to pitch inside. So he would go and he'd play, but he wouldn't talk to anybody. He was like, it's to that point though. My kids met him when they were little. They were like 7 and 9. Sweetest guy in the world to my kids. They had one of my sons had a baseball. What's that?
It's a famous story that he wore glasses, and when he went to dinner with Willie Mays, and Willie Mays saw he wore glasses, he was afraid to stand in the box because he didn't know if he could see anybody. But that was a great time because that's what I loved the National League. And in the mid 60s, when there were 2 All-Star games, the National League won like 12 in a row. And back then, starting pitchers would go 3 innings. And, the National League would roll out Koufax, Marichal, and Gibson. And the American League would never get any hits off those 3 guys for about 6 straight years, as you can imagine.
Okay, I'm going to give you my final 6. And one of these guys is the toughest guy to ever play the game. Okay, I got to put Ripken in there, obviously, for 26-32, right? And all the injuries. Griffey Jr., who didn't find a wall that he wouldn't try to run through, right? Carlton Fisk, 24 years catching. 24 years catching. Curt Flood gave his career up in order for the whole league, for the players to get free agency and to have a determination of where they'd play. He only played, I think, 13 games. He missed the whole season after, holding out. And then the last 2, Jackie Robinson and Henry Aaron. So that's so we got Henry Aaron, Curt Flood, Jackie Robinson, Carlton Fisk, Jr., and Ripken. You got to make a decision. Toughest guy, or did I leave somebody out?
Well, if you're looking about mean guys, I remember again.
Not mean, tough.
Well, mean, tough. I remember Bill White again talking about a pitcher from the Pirates named Bob Veal, who was a big hard thrower. And Bill White said if you'd hit a home run off him earlier in the game, your next time up, you didn't bother digging in because you were going down. Okay.
And we got to say this too, Doc. Back in the days when a pitcher had to bat, it was a different thing because he knew he'd have to get in the box. So it was a different balance. You remember when Clemens threw that bat at Piazza, and he would never come to bat again in the Mets stadium because he wouldn't bat and shake because he knew they were going to drill him.
Yeah,
so he's not on my short list of tough. But so if I had to pick one of these guys, and I had to pick one, I'd have to say Jackie Robinson, because not only did he have to play and prove himself every game, but he had to listen to that stuff. That story about Pee Wee Reese going out at shortstop, I think it was in Cincinnati, and putting his arm around him. And I always, that was like one of those stories that like you almost believe it didn't happen, except I've seen a picture of it, right? So I have to pick, and these guys are all tough, and it's hard. But when you're talking about attitude and toughness, how do you beat Jackie Robinson, right?
Well, if you're including mental stress, for certain. And again, back in those days, players got spiked, which,
right.
I'm sure if somebody got spiked today intentionally, they'd be suspended. But certainly with the emotional attitude, on top of which, as has been well documented, he was told he really couldn't fight back for 2 years.
Right.
So you really have to hold that emotion in. So if you're going to include that, I guess you'd have to put him at the top of the list. And then, of course, you got to put Junior next, just because, as we said, he didn't just play every game, he played every inning. And at shortstop, and the last guy would probably be Fisk, because if you ever met him, he's kind of a tall, lanky guy who's not like Yogi Berra, 5'8", kind of sitting behind the plate. For a tall, lanky guy to fold up behind the plate like that for that many years is, to me, an amazing feat of endurance, if you know what I mean. And he didn't really play first base much. He pretty much caught. And I'm sure you've met him. He's just not your prototypical catcher when you look at the way he's put together, if you know what I mean.
When he walks into a room, people still go like this. You know, they never forget. Dr. Michael Jacobs, what's up, Doc? Segment here. You can find it, of course, you're looking at it right now, or you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or our YouTube page for Bmore Baseball Podcast. Doc, always great to see you and always great to talk to you. We'll see you next week.
Do you know who I am? I'm kind of a big deal.